The grand mansion stood on the hill like a castle, its windows glowing golden against the darkening sky. Inside, Elena Martinez hurried through the long hallway, her practical black flats barely making a sound on the marble floor. Her arms were full of fresh towels for the guest bathrooms, just one of 100 tasks she needed to complete before her boss's important dinner party tonight. "Elena." The sharp voice made her freeze. "Where are the crystal glasses I requested?" Elena turned to face Richard Blackwood, who stood in the doorway of his study. At 45, Richard had the kind of handsome features that seemed carved from stone, and about as warm. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, much like everything else in his life. "They're being polished in the kitchen, sir," Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. "They'll be ready in 10 minutes. Richard checked his expensive watch with a frown. "Make it 5. The Zhangs will be here in an hour and everything must be perfect." "Yes, sir," Elena nodded, already calculating how to speed up the process without breaking anything. That would be a disaster she couldn't afford, especially since she desperately needed this job. At 28, Elena had not imagined her life would look like this, serving as a personal attendant to one of the country's most demanding real estate tycoons. 6 months ago, she'd been hired after Richard had fired his previous assistant for bringing the wrong kind of sparkling water to a business meeting. Elena had already lasted longer than most. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Rivera, the housekeeper, carefully drying the last of the crystal glasses. "He's in one of his moods," Elena whispered, setting down the towels and picking up a cloth to help. Mrs. Rivera, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled into a tight bun, just shook her head. "4th assistant this year, and you're the only one who's figured out how to manage him." "I wouldn't say I figured it out," Elena said with a small smile. "I'm just good at staying invisible." And she was. Elena had perfected the art of fading into the background, anticipating needs before they were voiced and fixing problems before they fully formed. It was exhausting but necessary. After her mother's medical bills and her younger brother's college tuition, Elena's bank account hovered perpetually near zero. By 7 o'clock, the mansion buzzed with activity as guests began to arrive. Men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses filled the grand ballroom where chandeliers cast a warm glow over everything. Elena moved efficiently through the crowd, offering trays of champagne and making sure everything ran smoothly. "Impressive place Blackwood has," she overheard a guest say. "Though I've heard he's impossible to work for." His companion laughed. 4 assistants in a year. Apparently he goes through staff like most people go through paper towels. Elena pretended not to hear as she collected empty glasses. She'd learned early that being Richard Blackwood's assistant meant being the subject of whispers and pitying looks. The pay was excellent when it wasn't being sent directly to pay bills, but the cost to her dignity was high. "Elena." Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood with a small group of important-looking people, beckoning her over with a slight motion of his finger. "More champagne for Mr. Zhang and his wife. Right away." "Sir," Elena said, moving quickly to fetch a fresh bottle. When she returned, the conversation had shifted to something about interest rates and property values in the downtown area. Elena filled glasses silently, trying to make herself as unobtrusive as possible. But as she stepped back, ready to disappear again, her eyes drifted to the far corner of the room. There, bathed in soft light, stood a magnificent grand piano. It was a Steinway, she realized with a small intake of breath. The glossy black surface reflected the chandelier light like a mirror. The sight of it made her heart squeeze with a familiar ache. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Elena startled, nearly dropping the empty champagne bottle. A man with silver-streaked hair and friendly eyes had appeared at her side. "Oh, yes, it is," she stammered, embarrassed to be caught staring. "I'm Harold Chen," the man said, offering his hand. "Old friend of Richard's. Well, as much as anyone can be friends with him." Elena shook his hand quickly, aware that she shouldn't be socializing with guests. "Elena Martinez. I work for Mr. Blackwood. Ah, the new assistant everyone's talking about. 6 months, I hear. That's practically a lifetime in Blackwood years." Elena gave a polite smile, her eyes drifting back to the piano. "Do you play?" Mr. Chen asked, following her gaze. "I used to," she admitted quietly. "A long time ago." "That piano is wasted here," Mr. Chen said with a sigh. "Richard bought it 3 years ago when he was dating that opera singer." Cost more than most people's homes. Now it just sits there collecting dust. I don't think it's been played more than twice. Elena felt a pang at the thought of such a beautiful instrument sitting untouched. Before she could respond, Richard's voice boomed across the room. Chen, stop bothering my staff and come hear about the new development in the harbor district. Mr. Chen winked at Elena. Duty calls. Nice meeting you, Elena. Left alone again, Elena took one last look at the piano before returning to her duties. For the next hour, she moved through the party like a shadow, refilling glasses, removing empty plates, and making sure everything ran perfectly. All the while, she felt the piano's presence like a magnet pulling at her. At 9:30, the guests moved into the dining room for a formal dinner. Elena supervised the catering staff, ensuring each course was served flawlessly. Richard sat at the head of the table, commanding attention with stories of his latest business conquests. From her position near the kitchen doors, Elena watched as he captivated the room. And that's when I told him his property wasn't worth half what he was asking. Richard finished a story to appreciative laughter and raised glasses. You always did have a killer instinct. Blackwood, said one of the men. A rival developer named Pierce who seemed determined to match Richard's story for story. It's why you're at the top of the game. Speaking of killer instincts, Mr. Chen cut in. Whatever happened to that opera singer you were seeing? Weren't you taking piano lessons to impress her? A flash of annoyance crossed Richard's face. Ancient history, Chen. That's right, Pierce said with a smirk. She left him for that symphony conductor. Guess your musical talents weren't up to par, Blackwood. The table went quiet. Everyone knew Richard hated being reminded of his failures, few as they were. I have more important things to focus on than tinkling keys, Richard said coldly. The piano is just decoration now. Much more valuable as a conversation piece than an instrument. Shame, Mr. Chen said. I've always believed music reveals something about a person that business never can. There's a certain soul required to truly appreciate great music. Elena saw Richard's jaw tighten. Mr. Chen had unknowingly hit a nerve, implying Richard lacked soul or depth was the kind of subtle insult he couldn't easily brush off. You think I don't appreciate music? Richard said, his voice dangerously soft. Mr. Chen raised his hands in surrender. I didn't mean— No, Richard interrupted, pushing his chair back and standing. Let's all adjourn to the ballroom for dessert and coffee. I think a little musical interlude would be perfect. Elena felt a chill as she watched the guests follow Richard back to the ballroom. Something in his expression made her uneasy. When everyone had settled with their coffee cups and dessert plates, Richard raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Harold believes I don't appreciate fine music. His smile didn't reach his eyes, so I thought we might enjoy some live entertainment. Elena was arranging dessert forks when she heard her name. Elena, Richard called, making every head in the room turn toward her. You've been admiring my piano all evening. Why don't you play something for our guests? The room went silent. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as 30 pairs of eyes fixed on her. She'd been caught, and now Richard was going to punish her by putting her on display. Sir, I don't— she began, her voice barely audible. Come now, Richard said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Don't be modest. I insist. Elena's hands trembled as she set down the forks. She could feel the mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment from the guests. Richard was watching her with cold amusement, clearly expecting her to make a fool of herself. With no choice, Elena walked slowly toward the grand piano, each step feeling like she was moving through deep water. The beautiful instrument that had called to her all evening now loomed like a guillotine. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since she'd been forced to leave music school when the money ran out. As she sank onto the bench, she could hear Richard telling his guests, "Let's see what hidden talents my staff has been keeping from me." The polished keys gleamed under her fingers as she placed her hands in position. Elena took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The room waited in awkward silence for what everyone assumed would be a painful display. Elena sat frozen at the piano bench, aware of every eye in the room watching her. The silence grew heavier with each passing second. She could feel Richard's smug smile without even looking at him. He was enjoying this, the power of making her squirm for his entertainment. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she'd last played. The memory of her final recital at the conservatory flashed through her mind. The standing ovation, the scholarship offer that had come too late, the tearful goodbye to her dreams when her mother's diagnosis changed everything. "We're waiting," Richard called out, his voice dripping with false encouragement. Someone in the crowd tittered nervously. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. What did it matter if she embarrassed herself? These weren't her friends. This wasn't her world. Tomorrow they would forget the awkward servant who couldn't play, and she would still need this job. Her hand settled on the keys, muscle memory guiding them to their proper positions. And then, without overthinking it, Elena began to play. The first few notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room. Hesitant at first, like a bird testing its wings after a long time grounded. Elena kept her eyes closed, letting her fingers remember what her mind had tried to forget. Each note opened a door she had carefully shut years ago. By the eighth measure, something shifted. The hesitation melted away and the music flowed through her, around her becoming part of the air everyone breathed. Elena's shoulders relaxed, her back straightened, and her chin lifted slightly as the melody carried her to a place where Richard Blackwood and his cruel games couldn't reach. In the crowd, the murmurs of anticipated embarrassment died away, replaced by genuine surprise. Richard's smile had vanished, his eyebrows drawing together in confusion as he watched his quiet, unassuming attendant transform before his eyes. Mr. Chen was the first to recognize the piece. He leaned forward in his chair, his coffee forgotten in his hand. "Chopin," he whispered to his wife. And not the simple preludes either. The room fell completely silent except for the piano. Elena had forgotten them all now. Her fingers danced across the keys with the confidence of someone who had once lived and breathed this music. The piece moved from gentle melancholy to passionate crescendos, each phrase telling a story without words. Mrs. Rivera stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel still in hand, a proud smile spreading across her face. She had known Elena for only 6 months, but she recognized the look of someone reclaiming a part of themselves they had been forced to abandon. Richard remained standing, his champagne glass halfway to his lips forgotten. This was not the awkward fumbling he had expected. This was not the humiliation he had planned to inflict on the woman who had dared to admire something of his. This was art. As Elena moved into the middle section of the piece, her confidence grew. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face reflecting the emotions carried by each phrase, sometimes peaceful, sometimes yearning, always authentic. Her fingers, usually occupied with polishing silver or arranging flowers, now created something beautiful instead of merely maintaining someone else's beauty. Mr. Pierce, Richard's business rival, leaned toward him and whispered, "Where did you find her?"
Juilliard?
Richard couldn't answer. He was transfixed by the sight of Elena, the woman who practically disappeared into the wallpaper most days, commanding the attention of every person in the room. For the first time since she'd started working for him, he actually saw her. The piece built toward its emotional peak, Elena's fingers moving with increasing intensity. A strand of her dark hair fell across her face, but she didn't break her concentration to push it away. The chandelier light caught the single tear that slid down her cheek, not from humiliation as Richard had intended, but from reconnecting with the person she had once been, the dreams she had once harbored. As she approached the final section, Elena finally opened her eyes. She didn't look at the crowd or at Richard. She looked only at her hands, watching them rediscover their purpose. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and delicate like the last stars before dawn. When she played the final chord, Elena sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the keys. The silence that followed was entirely different from the one that had preceded her performance. This was the breathless quiet of genuine awe. Then Mr. Chen began to applaud. Others quickly joined in, the sound swelling until it filled the ballroom. Someone whispered, "Bravo!" A woman in the back wiped a tear from her eye. Mrs. Rivera beamed with vicarious pride. Only Richard remained motionless, his face unreadable as he stared at Elena. She stood awkwardly from the bench, smoothing her simple black dress, the momentary confidence already beginning to fade. She looked up, finally meeting Richard's gaze across the room. His expression was complex, surprise, confusion, and something else she couldn't identify. "That was extraordinary," Mr. Chen said, approaching the piano. "Absolutely extraordinary. You studied at a conservatory, I assume?" Elena nodded, her voice returning small and soft. Yes, sir. For 3 years. Which one? Asked a woman in a red dress. Eastman, Elena replied, naming the prestigious school she had attended on scholarship before life intervened. The guests crowded around her, suddenly interested in the woman they had ignored all evening. Questions flew at her from all directions. Why aren't you performing professionally? Do you teach? Will you play something else? Elena felt overwhelmed by the attention, her cheeks flushing. This wasn't why she had played. She had played because she'd had no choice, because Richard had forced her to. And now, ironically, she had nowhere to hide. I think that's enough. Richard's voice cut through the chatter. Elena has duties to attend to. The crowd parted reluctantly as Richard approached the piano. His face had composed itself back into its usual mask of control, but his eyes kept studying Elena as if trying to reconcile this new information with what he thought he knew about her. The dessert plates need clearing, he said, his voice strangely quiet. Elena nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape. Yes, sir. As she moved toward the kitchen, she heard Mr. Pierce say, Blackwood, you old fox. You planned this, didn't you? What a showstopper. Richard said nothing, but Elena felt his eyes following her across the room. For the next hour, she moved mechanically through her tasks, collecting plates, directing the cleaning staff, making sure the guests had everything they needed. But something had changed. The guests who had previously looked through her now smiled and nodded. Several tried to engage her in conversation about music. One woman slipped her a business card with a handwritten note. My daughter needs a piano teacher. By midnight, the last guests were leaving. Elena stood in the foyer helping people find their coats and calling for their drivers. Remarkable evening, Blackwood, Mr. Chen said as he shook Richard's hand, particularly the entertainment. He turned to Elena and bowed slightly. Thank you for the music, Ms. Martinez. It was a privilege. Elena smiled uncertainly, still not used to being treated as anything other than invisible. When the final guest had departed, the house fell into an exhausted quiet. The catering staff had packed up and gone, and Mrs. Rivera had retired to her quarters in the East Wing. Only Elena remained, moving quietly through the ballroom, straightening furniture and collecting forgotten glasses. She paused by the piano, running one finger lightly along its edge. Playing again after so long had awakened something in her, a hunger she had forced herself to forget. Her throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Why didn't you tell me? Elena spun around. Richard stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, jacket off, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired, the sharp edges of his usual demeanor softened by the late hour and perhaps the alcohol. Tell you what, sir, she asked, though she knew perfectly well, that you could play like that. He stepped into the room, moving closer to the piano. That you studied at Eastman? Elena looked down. It wasn't relevant to the job. Not relevant? Richard repeated, raising an eyebrow. You're a concert-level pianist working as my personal assistant, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning? Former pianist, Elena corrected quietly. And no, I didn't think it mattered. Richard took another step toward her, studying her face. Why did you stop? Talent like that, it's rare. Elena hesitated. She had never discussed her personal life with Richard before. Their relationship had always been strictly professional, bordering on impersonal. But something in his question seemed genuinely curious rather than merely polite. Life happened, she finally said. Sometimes we don't get to choose. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, waiting for more. Elena stood in uncomfortable silence under Richard's scrutiny. She wasn't used to her boss showing any interest in her as a person, rather than as an employee. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, counting the seconds of this strange new dynamic between them. Sometimes we don't get to choose. Richard repeated her words slowly. What exactly happened? Elena sighed, running her finger along the edge of the piano. My mother got sick during my 3rd year at Eastman. Cancer. The word still felt heavy in her mouth even after all this time. I was on scholarship, but it only covered tuition, not living expenses. And then the medical bills started coming. Richard's expression remained neutral, but he set his whiskey down on a side table and leaned against the piano. Go on. I took a semester off to help her through chemo. Worked 3 jobs. Elena smiled faintly at the memory. I thought I'd go back once she was better. But she didn't get better, Richard guessed, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Elena shook her head. No, and my little brother was still in high school. Someone had to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. She shrugged, trying to make it seem like less than it was. So I chose family over music. Lots of people make harder choices every day. Richard was quiet for a moment. And now, your mother passed away 2 years ago, Elena finished. My brother's in college now, engineering at State. I'm still paying off the medical debt and helping with his tuition. Her chin lifted slightly. That's why I needed this job so badly. The salary is significant. A flash of understanding crossed Richard's face. Her desperate need to keep this position explained a lot about her unwavering patience with his demanding nature. And that's why you never mentioned the piano, he said. You thought I might see it as a distraction from your duties. Elena nodded. Most employers don't want to know their staff had other dreams once. She met his eyes directly. Besides, I didn't think you'd care. The blunt truth of her statement hung in the air between them. Richard frowned slightly, unable to deny it. He hadn't cared. Not until tonight, when she had revealed herself to be more than just the efficient shadow that kept his life running smoothly. Do you still play? Outside of being forced to entertain my guests, I mean. There was a hint of self-deprecating humor in his tone. No, Elena said quietly. Tonight was the first time in 5 years. Richard's eyebrows shot up in surprise. 5 years? And you played like that? I practiced 6 hours a day for 15 years before that, Elena said simply. Some things stay in your hands. Richard turned to look at the piano, trailing his fingers across its glossy surface. And yet you never even touched it. I've seen you dust it, arrange flowers on it, but never once did you open the lid when you thought no one was looking. It wasn't mine to play. Elena straightened her shoulders. Will there be anything else tonight, Mr. Blackwood? It's getting late. Richard studied her for a long moment, as if seeing new dimensions to her that had been invisible before. No, he finally said. You can go. But Elena, she paused at the door. Thank you for tonight. You saved me from looking like a complete Philistine in front of Chen. A small, surprised smile touched her lips. You're welcome, sir. And Elena, yes? Feel free to play at any time. He gestured to the piano. It should be played by someone who knows how. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left the room. The drive to her small apartment took 30 minutes. It was nearly 2 a.m. by the time she unlocked the door to the tiny one-bedroom place she called home. Everything about it was the opposite of Richard's mansion. Cramped, slightly worn, but clean and carefully maintained. What little free time she had was spent making her modest space feel like home. Too wired to sleep, Elena made a cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table, her mind replaying the events of the evening. Her fingers tapped out Chopin's notes on the tabletop, muscle memory fully awakened now. Playing tonight had been like running into an old friend, comforting and painful at the same time. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her brother, Luis, still up studying. How was the fancy party? Did the rich people eat their soup with the right spoon? Elena smiled. Luis had a way of making her laugh even when she was exhausted. She texted back. They managed the soup spoons fine. I ended up playing their piano. Long story, his response was immediate. What? You played, call me. Despite the late hour, she dialed his number. Tell me everything, Luis demanded when he answered. Elena recounted the evening. Richard's attempt to humiliate her. The unexpected performance and the strange conversation afterward. He tried to make you look stupid in front of everyone. Luis was indignant. What a jerk. You should quit. It's not that simple, Elena sighed. The pay, I know. My tuition and the medical bills. Luis's voice softened. But sis, you gave up everything for us. When do you get to live your life? I am living my life, Elena protested. No, you're existing. There's a difference. Luis was quiet for a moment. You know what Mom would say if she were here? Elena did know. Her mother had been heartbroken when Elena left music school. You have a gift, she had said. The world needs to hear it. I have to be practical, Elena told her brother, the same words she had told herself countless times. Dreams don't pay bills. Maybe not, Luis conceded, but he said you could play his piano any time, right? That's something. After they hung up, Elena sat in her quiet apartment thinking about her brother's words and Richard's unexpected offer. The idea of playing regularly again both thrilled and terrified her. Music had been her identity once, her future, her purpose. Losing it had been like losing a limb. She had learned to function without it, but never stopped feeling its phantom presence. Sleep finally found her just as dawn was breaking. The next morning, Elena arrived at the mansion at her usual time, 7:30 a.m. Despite the late night, she moved efficiently through her morning routine, checking Richard's schedule, preparing his preferred breakfast and laying out the day's newspapers in his study. Usually, Richard emerged from his bedroom suite at precisely 8:15, but this morning the house remained quiet well past that time. Elena checked her watch, wondering if she should knock on his door. In 6 months, he had never once deviated from his schedule. At 9:30, Richard finally appeared, looking uncharacteristically rumpled. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Elena asked, concerned. "Fine," he muttered, heading straight for the coffee she'd kept warm. "Late night. You have a meeting with the development team at 10, she reminded him gently. "Should I reschedule?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, which lacked its usual perfect styling. "No, just push it to 11. He took a long drink of his coffee, then looked up at her. "About last night? I've already tidied everything," Elena assured him quickly. "The caterers did an excellent job cleaning up, and all the rental items have been collected." "That's not," Richard started, then shook his head. "Never mind. 11 o'clock for the meeting. And I'll need the Henderson contract reviewed by this afternoon." "Already on your desk," Elena said. "The sections that need your attention are flagged." Richard nodded and headed to his study, leaving Elena puzzled by his behavior. Throughout the morning, she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. It was disconcerting, like being under surveillance. By lunchtime, Elena couldn't stand the strange atmosphere anymore. She knocked on the study door with his sandwich and salad. "Your lunch, sir," she said, placing the tray on his desk. Richard pushed aside the papers he'd been reading. "Thank you." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you mean what you said last night? About not having played in 5 years?" Elena nodded. "Yes." "That seems like a waste," he said bluntly. "We all make choices," Elena replied, her voice carefully neutral. Richard frowned. "Sit down for a minute." Surprised, Elena perched on the edge of the chair opposite his desk. In 6 months, he had never invited her to sit in his presence. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "The charity gala for the Children's Hospital is next month. They always have live music during the dinner portion." Elena waited, not sure where this was going. "What would you think about playing?" "It would be a paid performance, of course," he added quickly, "separate from your regular duties." Elena stared at him, caught completely off guard. "You want me to play at the gala?" "You'd be perfect. The guests last night couldn't stop talking about you." He leaned forward. "Chen called me this morning specifically to ask if you'd be performing again soon." I don't know," Elena stammered. "I haven't practiced regularly in years. I'd need to prepare, and with my schedule here, I'll arrange for you to have time," Richard said, waving away her concerns. 2 hours each day to practice. We can adjust your duties." "Why are you doing this?" Elena asked, genuinely puzzled by his sudden interest in her musical career. Richard looked uncomfortable with the direct question. "Let's just say I recognize talent when I see it. Even if I was trying to—" He trailed off. "Humiliate me?" Elena supplied. He had the grace to look ashamed. "That wasn't my finest moment." Elena considered his offer. The thought of performing again, properly, with time to prepare, sent a thrill through her. But she was also wary. "And if I say no?" "Then you say no," Richard shrugged. "It's an offer, not an order." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of an ulterior motive, but finding none. "I'd need to think about it." "Of course," Richard nodded. "Take a few days." He hesitated, then added, "And Elena, regardless of your decision, the piano is still yours to play, whenever you want." 3 days passed, and Elena still hadn't given Richard an answer about the charity gala. The piano stood silent in the ballroom, though she found her eyes drifting to it whenever she passed by. Each time she heard her brother's words echoing in her mind. "You're existing, not living." On the 4th morning, Elena arrived to find Richard already in the kitchen, something that had never happened before. He was making his own coffee, another first. "Good morning," she said, hiding her surprise. "I can do that for you." "I'm perfectly capable of making coffee," Richard replied, though his uncertain movements around the machine suggested otherwise. "Have you decided about the gala?" Elena set down her bag. If I say yes, I'll need access to sheet music, and I should warn you that I might not be up to the standard people expect. Is that a yes? Richard asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Elena took a deep breath. Yes, I'll play at the gala. The smile broke through fully then, transforming Richard's usually stern face. Excellent. I've already spoken to the event organizer. They're thrilled. As for sheet music, he gestured toward his study. Come with me. Puzzled, Elena followed him. On his desk sat a large paper shopping bag from Greenfield's Music Shop, the city's most prestigious music store. What's this? She asked. Open it, Richard instructed, leaning against his desk with his coffee cup. Inside, Elena found several books of sheet music, collections of Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, and Bach. Beneath those was a leather-bound folder containing loose sheet music for dozens of individual pieces. How did you know what to get? She asked, running her fingers reverently over the Chopin collection. I didn't, Richard admitted. I told the store owner I needed music for an accomplished pianist who favors the romantics but might want options. He put this together. Elena was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Thank you. This is very generous. Consider it an investment in the gala's entertainment, Richard said, his tone returning to its usual businesslike manner. Now about your practice schedule. I've spoken with Mrs. Rivera about redistributing some of your duties. You'll have 2 hours each afternoon from 2 to 4 to use the piano. Will that be sufficient? More than sufficient, Elena nodded. Thank you. Good. Richard checked his watch. I have a conference call in 10 minutes. Could you bring me the Westlake project files? Just like that, they were back to their normal roles, boss and assistant. But something had shifted subtly in how Richard spoke to her, a new note of respect coloring his requests. That afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, Elena approached the piano with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had selected several pieces that might work for the gala, but decided to start with familiar ground, the Chopin nocturne she'd played at the dinner party. Her fingers moved more confidently this time, the notes flowing with growing assurance as she reacquainted herself with the instrument. The piece felt different in daylight, less dramatic but no less moving. Elena lost herself in the music, unaware that she was being watched. Richard stood in the doorway, conference call long finished, listening with an expression of quiet wonder. He had heard her play before, of course, but this was different. There was no audience to impress, no point to prove. This was Elena playing for herself, and somehow it was even more beautiful. He slipped away before she finished, not wanting to interrupt her private moment with the music. The days fell into a new rhythm. Elena continued her regular duties each morning, then spent her afternoons at the piano. She selected 3 pieces for the gala, the Chopin Nocturne, a Debussy prelude, and a Bach invention, and worked diligently to bring them back to performance level. Richard found reasons to be near the ballroom during her practice sessions. Sometimes he worked on his laptop at a small table in the corner, pretending to be too absorbed in spreadsheets to notice her playing. Other times he simply paused in the hallway outside, letting the music wash over him before continuing with his day. A week before the gala, Elena was practicing the Bach when she made a mistake, hitting a wrong note that shattered the precise mathematical beauty of the piece. She stopped abruptly, frustrated. Why did you stop? Richard asked from his corner table. It was going well. I hit a wrong note, Elena said. The fingering in measure 27 is tricky. I didn't notice, Richard admitted. I did. Elena flexed her fingers. 5 years away from the piano takes its toll. My technique isn't what it was. Richard closed his laptop and walked over to the piano. Play it again. Show me the trouble spot. Elena played the passage slowly, demonstrating where her fingers struggled with a particularly awkward transition. My hand isn't stretching the way it used to, she explained. I need to rebuild the muscle memory. Like this? Richard placed his hand on the keys, attempting to mimic her movement. Elena laughed softly. Not quite. Without thinking, she reached out and repositioned his fingers. Like this. The moment her hand touched his, something electric passed between them. Elena pulled back quickly, suddenly aware of the boundary she had crossed. Sorry, she murmured. Force of habit from when I used to teach. You taught piano? Richard asked, seeming unfazed by the brief contact. Elena nodded. During my time at Eastman, it helped with expenses. She smiled at the memory. I had 5 students, all beginners. They called me Miss Elena and brought me drawings instead of practicing their scales. You miss it, Richard observed. It wasn't a question. Sometimes, Elena admitted. More than I realized. Richard studied her for a moment. What if you taught again? After hours using the piano here? There must be plenty of people who would pay for lessons from an Eastman-trained pianist. I couldn't, Elena protested. This is your home, not a music studio. It's a thought, Richard shrugged. The piano sits idle most of the time anyway. He stepped back. I should let you get back to practicing. But instead of returning to his table, he left the room, leaving Elena to wonder at the strange new path their relationship was taking. The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of activity. The Children's Hospital benefit was one of the biggest charity events of the year, held at the Grand Hotel downtown. As Richard's personal assistant, Elena would normally have been busy behind the scenes making sure everything ran smoothly. Instead, she found herself in a hotel dressing room, preparing to perform. Mrs. Rivera had helped her select a dress, a simple but elegant black gown that transformed her from invisible assistant to poised performer. Her dark hair was swept up in a neat chignon, and she wore her mother's pearl earrings, her only piece of fine jewelry. A knock at the door startled her. 5 minutes, Ms. Martinez, called a staff member. Elena's heart raced. 5 minutes until she stepped onto a stage for the first time in years, in front of 300 of the city's wealthiest and most influential people. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress. Another knock, softer this time. Elena, it's me. Richard stood outside, handsome in his tuxedo, a small box in his hands. May I come in? Elena nodded and he entered, closing the door behind him. You look different, he said, his eyes taking in her transformation. Good different or bad different? She asked, attempting to joke despite her nerves. Good, he said simply. Very good. He held out the box. This is for you, a small token for the occasion. Elena opened it to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature piano. It's beautiful, she breathed. But you didn't need to. I wanted to, Richard interrupted. Consider it a thank you for saving the gala. The original pianist canceled last week. Elena looked up sharply. What? But you asked me to play a month ago. Richard had the grace to look embarrassed. A small deception. I'm sorry. The truth is, after hearing you play, I canceled the original pianist. I knew you'd be better. You had that much faith in me. After one performance? Elena was stunned. I know talent when I hear it, Richard said firmly. Here, let me. He took the bracelet and fastened it around her wrist. His fingers lingered on her skin a moment longer than necessary. Are you nervous? He asked softly. Terrified, Elena admitted. Don't be. You've been practicing for this your entire life. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. They're going to love you. Just like, he stopped himself. Just like what? Elena asked. Before Richard could answer, another knock came at the door. Ms. Martinez? You're on in 2 minutes. Go, Richard said. I'll be right in the front row. Elena took a deep breath and headed for the stage. As she walked, she realized what Richard had almost said. Just like he did. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel fell silent as she took her place at the gleaming concert grand. 300 faces watched expectantly, but Elena sought only one in the crowd. Richard sat exactly where he had promised, in the center of the front row. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. Elena placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The Chopin nocturne flowed from her fingers, each note clear and true. As she played, she felt something shifting inside her, a return to herself, to the person she had been before life forced her to set aside her dreams. When she finished the first piece, the applause was thunderous. Elena moved smoothly into the Debussy, then the Bach, each performance more confident than the last. The music carried her away from the crowd, away from the years of struggle and sacrifice, to a place where only the perfect marriage of melody and harmony existed. As she played the final notes of the Bach, Elena looked up to find Richard watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, a mixture of pride, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster than the music ever had. The applause seemed to go on forever after Elena's performance. People rose to their feet, their faces alight with genuine appreciation. She bowed gracefully, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and elation. This feeling, this connection with an audience through music, had once been as essential to her as breathing. Somehow, against all odds, she had found her way back to it. As she left the stage, people reached out to touch her arm, to offer congratulations. A distinguished older woman pressed a business card into her hand, murmuring something about her music foundation. Elena smiled and nodded, still riding the wave of adrenaline that came from performing. In the reception area outside the ballroom, a small crowd gathered around her. Questions flew at her from all directions. Where do you normally perform? Do you have a CD available? Are you accepting new students? Elena fielded them as best she could, explaining that this was actually her first performance in years. The revelation only seemed to increase their interest. Then we've witnessed a comeback, declared a silver-haired man who introduced himself as the head of the City Symphony's board, a remarkable one at that. Through the sea of well-wishers, Elena caught sight of Richard standing at a distance watching her with a small smile. He raised his champagne glass in a silent toast when their eyes met. The gesture sent an unexpected warmth through her. It was nearly midnight when the crowd finally thinned, allowing Elena to slip away to the quiet of the hotel lobby. She sat on a plush sofa, finally allowing her tired legs to rest. The evening had been magical but exhausting. There you are. Richard's voice broke through her thoughts. He sat beside her, loosening his bow tie with one finger. You were hiding. Taking a breather, Elena corrected with a small smile. It's been an overwhelming night. You were extraordinary, Richard said simply. Everyone is talking about you. That's strange, Elena admitted. I'm used to being invisible. I don't think you'll have that luxury anymore, Richard said. Not after tonight. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Elena twisted the piano charm on her new bracelet, thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. How much she had changed. Thank you, she said suddenly. Richard raised an eyebrow. For what? The bracelet? For forcing me to play that night at your dinner party, Elena said. It was cruel and you did it for all the wrong reasons, but... She looked down at her hands, the hands that had reconnected with music against all odds. But it woke something up in me that I thought was gone forever. Richard's face softened with what might have been regret. I was a different person then, were you? Elena asked, genuinely curious. Or did you just see me differently? The question hung between them, honest and challenging. Both, perhaps, Richard admitted after a moment. I didn't see you at all before. You were just function, not a person with dreams and talents and a past. And now? Elena asked quietly. Before Richard could answer, his phone buzzed. He checked it and frowned. The car is waiting. We should go. The ride back to Richard's mansion was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Elena watched the city lights pass by, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would everything go back to normal? Would she return to being just the efficient assistant who kept Richard's life running smoothly? The thought made her heart sink in a way she hadn't expected. When they arrived, Richard surprised her by asking, Would you like a drink? To celebrate your triumph? They ended up in his study, Richard pouring 2 glasses of expensive scotch. Elena had never been invited to share a drink with him before. It was yet another shift in their ever-evolving relationship. To new beginnings, Richard said, raising his glass. Elena clinked her glass against his. New beginnings, she echoed. The scotch burned pleasantly as she sipped it. I should tell you, she said, setting down her glass. I received 7 requests for piano lessons tonight. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Already? That's impressive. I'm not sure what to do about them, Elena admitted. I don't have a piano at my apartment, and even if I did, there's barely room for my sofa, let alone a piano. Use mine, Richard said immediately. I meant what I said before. The house is empty most evenings anyway. Elena studied his face, looking for the catch. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Music, he said simply. The house was always too quiet even before I knew what was missing. Something in his voice made Elena's pulse quicken. She looked away, suddenly unsure of the ground between them. I should probably go, she said, putting down her glass. It's late and it's been a long night. Of course, Richard stood. I'll have Thomas drive you home. No need. Elena shook her head. I can call a rideshare. It's almost 2 in the morning, Richard pointed out. Please let me make sure you get home safely. Elena relented, and 15 minutes later she was in the back of Richard's town car, heading to her small apartment. The evening replayed in her mind. The performance, the applause, the way Richard had looked at her when she finished playing. Something was changing between them, something both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning, Elena woke later than usual, grateful that it was Sunday and she wasn't expected at work. Her phone was filled with messages, from her brother, from Mrs. Rivera, and surprisingly from several people she'd met at the gala. Word was spreading about her performance. One message in particular caught her eye. It was from Richard, sent at 7 a.m. "The house is too quiet without your music. Come play whenever you like. The door is always open for you." Elena read the message 3 times, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it simply a generous offer from an employer who had discovered his employee's talent? Or was there something more behind his words? She spent the day cleaning her apartment and catching up on laundry. Ordinary tasks that felt strange after the glamour of the previous night. By late afternoon, she found herself restless, her fingers itching to touch piano keys. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her purse and headed to Richard's mansion. The house was quiet when she arrived, and for a moment, Elena wondered if Richard was even home. She used her key to let herself in, calling out a tentative hello. No answer. Relief and disappointment mingled as she realized she was alone. This was probably better. She could play without feeling self-conscious under Richard's gaze. She made her way to the ballroom where the piano waited, its lid already open as if expecting her. Elena sat at the bench and began to play, not the formal pieces from the gala, but music she loved, pieces that spoke to her soul. Schubert's Impromptu, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a jazz standard her mother had taught her when she was little. She played for herself, pouring all the complex emotions of the past weeks into the music. "Beautiful," came a voice from the doorway when she finished a piece. Elena turned to see Richard leaning against the doorframe, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, an outfit she had never seen him wear before. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said, walking into the room. "Your message said the door was always open," Elena replied. "So it did." Richard sat in a chair near the piano. "I meant it." "Why?" The question had been building in her mind for weeks. "Why are you doing all this?" "The music, the gala, the offers to teach here." "What do you want from me, Richard?" He looked taken aback by her directness, but then a slow smile spread across his face. "You called me Richard, not Mr. Blackwood or sir." That's a first. Elena hadn't even noticed the slip. "You didn't answer my question." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "When you played that night at the dinner party, it was like watching someone step into the light after hiding in shadows. I saw you, really saw you, for the first time." He ran a hand through his hair, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "And I didn't like what that said about me, that I could have someone working so closely with me for months and never see them as a whole person." "So this is about guilt?" Elena asked, her heart sinking a little. "No," Richard shook his head firmly. "It started there, perhaps, but it's become something else." He stood and walked to the piano, his fingers brushing the edge. "I've built my entire life around acquiring things, Elena. Properties, companies, objects of value. I measure success in assets and net worth." He looked at her directly now. "But when you play, I'm reminded there are things of immeasurable value. Things I've been missing." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Like what?" "Beauty, passion, purpose beyond profit." His voice dropped. "Connection." The word hung in the air between them, filled with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. "I have a proposition for you," Richard said, switching to a more business-like tone. "A new position," Elena tensed. "What kind of position?" "The Children's Hospital wants to start a music therapy program. They were impressed by your performance and asked if you might be interested in developing it. It would be part-time at first, 3 days a week. And the other 2 days?" Elena asked, hardly daring to hope. "You'd still work here, overseeing the household and my schedule, but as an estate manager, not a personal assistant. Better pay, more reasonable hours," he hesitated, "and you'd have access to the piano anytime, for practice teaching whatever you want." Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was offering. "Why would you do this for me?" Richard's expression softened. "Because talent like yours shouldn't be hidden away. Because you deserve the chance to rebuild the life that circumstances took from you." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "And selfishly, Because I want you to stay in my life, Elena. Just not as the invisible woman who picks up after me. Elena looked up at him, seeing vulnerability in his eyes that had never been there before. The cold, demanding tycoon who had once tried to humiliate her for his own amusement had transformed into someone capable of genuine kindness, someone who saw her value beyond what she could do for him. I'll need to think about it, she said softly.